toward the One, the perfection of love, harmony, and beauty, the only being, united with all the illuminated souls who form the embodiment of the messenger, the spirit of guidance.
Well, welcome everybody. This is our third class in this series on the Imaginal faculty. And we are going to delve into some things that are going to really help us put the Imaginal faculty to use tonight. All about creativity. And a lot of what we'll talk about today is based on something that you could also watch on Netflix. It is something called the Creative Brain, the Creative Brain. And it's helping us to take another look at the brain, not thinking that everything that happens in our spirituality has to do with just different connections within the brain, but that the brain is an incredible platform or base from which we work. And we're going to take a look at how the brain is helpful to us and how we can do different things that make the brain even better helper for us. So let's take a look, first of all, at a fellow that was leading us in these discoveries said that the greatest tool of the human is the brain. We might have different opinions as spiritual beings that there might be other factors, but it surely does a lot, and it can be a better helper for us. So first of all, think about animals and their brains. They do a connection between seeing the food and eating the food that is just immediate. It's an automatic response. So that's an example of an instinct. And there's nothing much that can be changed about that. If it's not going to think about, well, I think I'll, throw the food at another animal, or I think it's going to eat the food. But humans, the way that our brains put together, if we see food, we might not have the outcome every time of eating the food right away. So they told us that there are many expanded connections and regions between the input and the output of the human brain. So if you had these two sections of your activities, in the middle you could think of many lines, many different possible connections, and all the different parts of the brain that can enable the passage of the neurons, all these connections of the neurons. It's a phenomenal number that can be activated. So we can disengage the instinct from the automatic response and do many other things. Our brains can forge new pathways, make new connections, think about things differently, consider possibilities. Because of its complexity, to process information in almost limitless ways, innumerable pathways through the networks. So we can rise above the instincts or disengage the instincts. So this means that we can consider all of the options before deciding what to do. We're going to have little tricks coming up pretty soon too that'll help us to do some of these things and to give ourselves more possibilities. Remember, Azurbash often talks about all the possibilities that are available, and even some of the research that's been done that shows when you connect the subtle with the manifest, then there are many more possibilities. Well, now we're already seeing that we have many more possibilities just because of our own brains and the way that they're put together and the way that our brain has developed. And you kind of begin to think about, well, why is the brain developing like this? How is it added all these ways to connect that weren't there before. Perhaps that is because what's on the next level up, which Azerbaijan will be describing a little bit later in terms of another kind of neural network. But let's consider a little bit more about the brains. There's also, besides the expanded regions between the input and output, the expansion of the frontal cortex. That's the part right here, which coincidentally, no, probably not coincidentally, but it is the place where we have the 6th and 7th chakras, and think about that and how that is the kind of ruling chakras of other in other activities of ours already. But when this expansion of the frontal cortex happened in the development of the humans, now we can unhook from the present place and time to try out new ideas. This is the real thinking section, and it is the place of the imagination. So we can now imagine the world that isn't our world yet. I hope that begins to sound like something to you. To me, it sounds like the Barzakh. It sounds like the idea of a place that is no place in the ancient Sufis' way of speaking about things, or an imaginal world. So this is now the development of something within us that is already set up as a place that that can add another dimension to our experience. So what is this dimension? Instead of having to try out every possibility, now we have a way of thinking about it. We can think, well, what would happen if we did this? And what is another thing that could happen instead of the thing that I'm thinking about? So that it's a place where we can try things and connect with other things. Thinking, well, how would that affect this person, or how would this affect what I was wanting to do in the future? So we can really consider all the possibilities and not have to act them out. So what do we have then in the brain? We have this place where we can make way more connections than the animals can. Although I have to say that there are seemingly some that the crows, for example, that know how to use tools, and there are many other examples in the animal kingdom that I think some things are already developing, but maybe we have been working on it longer and even developing our own brains in a certain kind of way. So this is really, when we talk about, now we're going to talk about creativity also. And not only thinking about art and music and drama and the things we often think of as creative exploits. One of the things that struck me a lot in this movie was at the very beginning, this woman who was in a prison outfit, in a prison, was speaking to the camera and saying, "I am somebody that I never could be." And this is because of a program that they had in the jails to develop their creativity. And this is not only use of arts, again, but this is like creative thinking, trying to think in a way that never had been thought before. Think about science, for example. All of science is based on creativity. Our son is a scientist, and he and his students challenge themselves to think outside the box, you would say, or think in a way that has never been thought before. And certainly that's a basis of what we've been doing in this spiritual work that you've been doing with us. So how can we develop this creativity? There are the things that hopefully you'll go away with, and also you're going to recognize things that you already do as a creative being. And you'll go, oh my gosh, right, I never knew I was doing those things, but really it was essential to me. there was something that I told Azerbaij about before we saw this show, and it was something that was always important to me, was to have a huge amount of input, a huge amount of experience. I would really relish hearing people's stories and seeing, and when I'd sell jewelry, we have a fair here every year, the Dia de los Muertos. And on that day, we'd have thousands, tens of thousands of people that would come. And I would just relish seeing what all these people are about and how they spoke and what was important to them, and variety, even in the art that I do. I'm a mixed media artist, so I'm mixing everything. And I love going out in nature and seeing all the patterns in nature. And I think probably bells are ringing with some of you too, that you love this variety, and that taking things from one realm and applying them to another. One pattern you see in one place, trying that pattern out in another. This is one of the important elements of creativity that were discussed in this show. Connecting new ideas to what you already know. Also, besides just taking in input, it's important how you're connecting it to what you already know, rather than just throwing out everything you know. So that's another thing to think about. How do you do that? And also, I'm going to give you some examples of people they spoke about in this show and show you what they were doing. Did you want to enter in on this?
So we've talked, those of you who've been with us in previous series of classes, we've talked about the necessity of there being a radical shift in our whole way of thinking. And so talking about working with the imaginal faculty is certainly a part of this, and creativity is certainly a part of this. And we've also talked about it not being a linear process. So it's not just putting a little bit more on what we've known and putting a little bit more on that, and just all logically sequencing what we think might come next. So we have to we'll weave together some things we've talked about before. We've talked about the process of Fana and Baka, the breaking down of old patterns, the in-between state, the reforming of something new that emerges from that, and the importance of being able to hang out in that in-between unformed state where we don't know what's going to come next. And we're letting go of our previous ways of understanding and perceiving. And at the same time, we're not losing our essential identity in the process of that. So Pure Light would always talk about the desirability of us learning how to free ourselves from our conditioning. Well, our conditioning is our habitual ways of reacting, of perceiving. And Hazrat Khan talks about circuits in the brain. He uses a little bit different terminology, but he talks about it's almost like there's highways that developed along familiar lines of thought. And it's just very easy for thoughts to continue along those lines. And that's why it's very hard to, for some people to shift away from the way they've always looked at things, because they think, well, that is reality that they've identified with their perception, instead of realizing that is a frame of reference, but it's not the reality. We recreate our perception of reality within the organ of the brain. The visual input comes in, the auditory input comes in, and from the senses and from that, our brain creates a reproduction of what the external world looks like, but that's not the same as what that world is. And as we've talked about many times before, we are beings that exist in many dimensions, but we're usually not aware of those dimensions. And so what we tend to do is just recycle what we have to work with. So you could say, well, maybe the most basic aspect of trying to be creative would just be rearranging what you already know about. Like, let's see, let's move this one over here, or let's put this one in relation to that. And sometimes that can lead to an opening and an insight and so on. But there's this really interesting idea called a weak connector in a network. So let's say you're trying to find a job, and so you just talk to the people that you know, and they know of some people that feel, but it's going to be limited what their contacts are. But if you connect with someone that you really don't know very well, they may have their whole other batch of contacts that's going to result in linking you up with something that's going to land you a job that you didn't know anything about. Well, like Ravani Ra was talking about, creativity works like that too. We bring in new input, and where does that input come from? Well, it comes from our experiences, yes, but also, and we talked about this, I believe, last week, about ways we kind of prime the pump to be able to experience subtle levels of our being. And we can do that through landscapes that have been described, like a landscape for the realm of pure spirit, a mountain with the stream melting at the top, and ice and snow and so on. And so these kind of just get us into it, but at a certain point, we really enter into an unfoldment of the imaginal faculty, and we discover some things that we couldn't possibly have come up with based on all of our previous database, all of our previous acquired knowledge. And so the mystics talk about acquired knowledge and revealed knowledge. And there's so much knowledge that can be revealed from inner experiences that is so much deeper and richer than what we could ever acquire from the other way. But once again, we have to be able to hook on to that faculty of imagination. I'll say just a little bit more about this and turn it back to Ravani Ra. So we've talked about a dualistic way of perceiving, which we're usually engaged in. And when we start working with our imaginal faculty, by default, we're going to start working with that dualistically. Like, I am using my imagination to try to imagine such and such, which is fine. That's how you get started. But if that's as far as we get, that's not going to take us to where we want to get to. Because remember, we're trying to connect with something in the Barzakh, in this subtle realm. We're trying to experience a circulation of light and wisdom from different aspects of reality and from our own being. And so we have to be able to be receptive to receiving that and to be able to make sense out of that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so examples then of creative people and giving you possible ideas for your own increase of imagination. So one of them had an ideas generator. So you might have an ideas generator. Well, what is that? They took us into his home, into one room, and in this room, he had shelves on every wall, and they were filled with models of little animals, kind of grotesque figures, some of them, people, probably nature spirits, all kinds of little beings. And he was actually he made comics. And so he would take some of this being and some of that being and put them together. And then he also had notebooks, like scrapbooks. And he must have taken pictures from about every magazine possible and every anything anyone gave them. I can imagine him chopping them all up into pieces and putting them in his books. But you could turn the pages and just see this wonderland of all this. Talk about input. It was an incredible place of input. And so this is the place from which he would create, sitting in the midst of all this. But I want to say, too, that it's not only just taking the elements, kind of like what you were talking about before, and sticking them together. It also, if you could imagine like a wheel of all the this type of being and that type of being, and the colors are another wheel, and that all these wheels could keep going and going and turning, and just looking at one thing on one of these pages would remind him of all those things in that series. So it's not just even 1 + 1 + 1. but it is an intersection of all of these possibilities. So that's the ideas generator that he would use and to bring his ideas. Someone else was very into art in another way, and their way was bending, breaking, and blending. So they did talk about taking things and combining them in different kinds of ways. But here you can see that some of it's bending, making it a little bit different than before, or adding a little bit of something to it, and then breaking, actually taking them apart and blending together, all kinds of different ways. And these are processes more than actually things that were put together. Then they took us into music, jazz musicians, and spoke to this man that said jazz is a mutt. He's a musician that knows that his unique experience, he said to the moderator, my unique experience is going to intervene to produce a unique work from whatever is the input. I'm never afraid, he said, of copying someone else's work. I can listen to someone else's music and then go off, and I'm working with even the same kinds of melodies and everything as this other person, but it's going to turn out unique experience and unique piece because of my unique experience. So I really identified with that, even thinking in all of us, even if we tried to make it someone else's work, it's going to come out as our own work. And then after a while, hopefully we'll think about that as a goal to bring in our uniqueness rather than what has ever been done before. Another idea, somebody who has said that getting out in the world, using what is around us to generate new ideas, concepts, designs, and perspectives. This always brings me back to nature. Now we can just see models in nature, the way that things, the patterns of nature to inspire us. And then finally, they took us to the prison where in the past, people were all, when probably now also in the present, in prisons, people are defined by the crime that put them into jail, that put them into prison. So that's what they've been reduced to, rather than being a person, rather than having all the possibilities that everybody has. They've been reduced to one little thing. So just like Azarbash speaking about a linear way of living or being stuck in a rut, that is an incredible rut. And when people began to see that their lives mattered, that their lives were full of possibilities, and were treated as such, and these programs, that's where the woman made the statement that I said before, I am somebody that I never could be. So she's thinking about things in a way different way and not just reinventing the way she does music. She's reinventing her whole being. So there were 3 different things that I'd like you to go away with that were helpful in developing creativity, and hopefully the creativity that we are speaking about, even in spiritual terms. We need to think about getting off the path of least resistance and trying something new. They said that our brains in some ways keep us from being creative because you probably noticed that being comfortable is a very agreeable kind of thing, and our brains often want us to, let's just do the thing that we want to do, the comfortable thing. So it's pushing ourselves out of the comfort zone, trying something new. And I think a lot of us here understand that part too. We have to have some comfort, and then we have to have at least an edge where we have something new going on, but maybe a little bit more of an edge. So that's the first one. The next one is to explore your range between comfort and something new. You might have different accommodation to a lot of new things. They had a wonderful musician and artist, Grimes, I think her name is. She goes by the name of Grimes in her music, and I'm going to look her up. And she's pretty phenomenal and pushes boundaries for sure. She even tells people, did my music make you uncomfortable? Oh, good. So she's kind of way out there, but she's probably would have a different tolerance than you might or I might, but everybody's different about this. But we can have a range of different possibilities and explore different ones that might be a little bit different. Sometimes our kids get us into that too, right? And we'll try some things that they might bring up. But see which ones kind of open you to something new, something different. And then the final increasing creativity idea here is don't be afraid of failure. Often we stay on this path of least resistance because we don't want to fail. This has been successful already. I want to keep doing this. And they showed a couple famous people who had spent lives of failure over and over again. They would produce shows and they wouldn't go anywhere. They wouldn't do anything. And one remarkable one had an amazing experience and has a show that you'd recognize if I spoke about it. But I want you to check out this show, and you'll check out the creative brain, and you'll get some more ideas of what we said. But failures contribute to your success. So we need to be able to incorporate that idea of failure as part of who we are, an important part of who we are. Just as the things that make us develop and progress are all a part of us too. It's important to have all of those. So these are pointers that can be used as developing the traditional kinds of creativity, but hopefully releasing us from places of non-creative, places of hardness, or places where we relied too much on what was familiar. So now we can open up in different kinds of ways. And these are things that are I think they are understandable, and things that we can watch ourselves and see how we're doing in these different kinds of ways. So would you like to continue?
Another way of thinking about that, what Ravani Rao was saying, not being afraid of failure, could be remembering what it says in the Bhagavad Gita, to act but not being attached to the fruit of our actions. So what does this mean? Many times when, let's say someone's working with a guide and they're given a practice to work with, and they work with it for a while and they go back to the guide, go, well, I don't really feel a lot happening with this. And perhaps the guide says, well, just stick with it. But if the person working with that practice can be open to something happening, and they don't know what it will be or when it will be, but having that confidence that if they have a sincere desire, that desire is going to be fulfilled. And it's similar to, I've mentioned this before, one of the main practices I have is to sit with a question. And sometimes it's a question about something that I've read about in science, and I'm wondering, well, I wonder how this applies to spirituality, or vice versa. And I'll just sit with that question. I don't just repeat it over and over again in my mind. But then I let go of it, and then I just hang out in this space and I wait for a response. And I always get a response. And it's not necessarily within that particular meditation. I think the longest I had to wait for a response to a question I had was 3 weeks, but I hung in there, and then the response was something that was very powerful and led to insights that have lasted me for many, many years. So sometimes it takes a while in that in-between state for us to undergo a process of preparation to be able to receive, I call them downloads from the divine, an input, and which in my experience is often something that seems just very condensed, and it may be something that'll take a year to really unpack. But as that's happening, my capacity to work with that has changed. And so Ravani Ra and I had a discussion a day or two ago about the studies that have been done, like the correlates of people in states of samadhi or different high states of consciousness. And this is happening in this part of the brain, and that's happening in that part of the brain. Well, these are just correlates. This is what the kind of the base station is doing. At the same time, we're experiencing something that is taking place far beyond the organ of the brain, but the brain is the mechanism that enables us to be kind of, it's like a transducer of a subtle level of experience that transduces it into a form that we can do something with, that it isn't lost. And that might be understandings, it might be images, it might be something that we create from that, which could be a work of art or a poem or music, or it could be in science, a breakthrough discovery that we make. So it's something that's bringing it all the way down. We come to the Barzakh, we come to this place of meeting of the two sides of our being, and there's a circulation between the two sides. There's the descending light, there's the way that light is transformed through the experiences of our being in life, and there's the returning light, and there's what happens when those two lights meet that enables a process that we previously talked about called Himma, H-I-M-M-A, the creative faculty of the heart, to be a co-creator in this new creation that is emerging at every instant. So that's kind of like the ultimate end of the using the imaginal faculty enables us to reach a point of becoming capable of participating in that co-creative process. And that co-creative process, as we've said before, cannot happen solely from the divine side of things, and it can't happen solely from our human side of things. It only happens through the relationship between those two sides and what arises from that. So Ravani Ra mentioned the idea of networks, and we have neural networks in our brain, and there's trillions of connections, ways of connecting of all the neurons in our brain, which is just amazing. So what can take place just within that is an awful lot, but what can take place as we realize that, I like to describe it as we are all part of a divine neural network of everything in all of existence, and everything is interconnected with everything else. And as we learn to work with consciousness, as we learn to be able to experience what we've called relational unity, a way of connecting with something that's not separate and it's not us dissolved into that or vice versa, then new ways of connection are formed. And they're not literal connections like this neuron connecting to that. They're like patterns of light interfacing with each other. And we've talked last time about the interference patterns of light. It's like what arises when two things are in a state of harmonic relationship with each other. There's a light that arises from that that's something more than the light of either side by itself. And so now, not only the fruit of that, which is what emerges, but it's the capacity for further emergence. And so now it's like there's a collective imaginal faculty that happens in the relationship between beings that are in this degree of connection with each other that is so magnified beyond what any one being could come up with on their own, even if they're what we think of as a totally enlightened being, even the Buddha. More can happen than what the Buddha could do just by the Buddha's self. And so think about that for a moment. I mean, think about the possibilities if we Well, we're talking to you now. I'm looking at our computer with the screen that enables the Zoom call that we can talk to you. And the reason we're able to do that is our computer has got hardware that we can plug into the internet, and we can pull out a certain uh, portion of all the things going on the internet where we can connect with each one of you. And if you think about it, it's happening through light, which is turned into electrical impulses uh, in our homes. And some people have fiber optic cable and so on. But it's like a two-way transmission of light that's enabling us to meet each other on whatever your screen is in front of you. And remember, we've talked before about how much can come through an interface in either direction, from us to you, from you to us. Well, the limit to that is the surface area of the screen. And in spirituality, what we mean by that is the degree to which we awaken to the multidimensional reality of our being. And so now there's so much more surface area, multidimensional surface area that can bring about this connection. So think about, imagine there's like different levels or degrees of the imaginal faculty. And the most basic level, and it doesn't mean it's bad because it's the basic level. Most basic level is you sitting and you're just trying to imagine something. And then you can move up a notch. And like Ravani Rao was talking about, you bring in input from other things in your immediate environment or experiences you open yourself up to, or trying something different that you haven't tried before. And what's happening physiologically, it's like when you learned how to ride a bike, it was awkward at first. You're making those new connections that weren't there before, but you're enabling different possibilities to happen instead of going down the familiar highways that have been carved out in the neural pathways of your brain. So there's a basic level, and then you move up a notch, and then there's learning how to come to the barzakh, learning how to enter in that state of relational unity, either with something in manifestation or something in the inner realms, and what can arise from that. And then ultimately, like I was saying earlier, being able to participate as a human divine being in this never-ending co-creative process of new emergence that's taking place from this twofold circulation of light, the descending and the returning light, and then what comes from that. So it's not just it's going this way and it's going that way. It's because of that circulation that something can emerge from it that was not there before. It's not that it was sitting there hidden and we're discovering it. It's being enabled by the uniqueness that we bring to that. So ultimately, you can say that our lives become living expressions of a unique creative unfoldment of the divine in existence. And we can enable that more and more with the faculty, the imaginal faculty that we have. But like any faculty, it's something that needs developing. And we have to be able to concentrate. We have to be able to have a tolerance, like Ravani Rao was saying, to go past what's familiar and open to something we don't know what it's going to be. We have to be able to let go of the familiar ways of understanding and trust that there's going to be something richer that's going to come from that if we allow ourselves to be in that hatching place. So all of these are ingredients of this process.
So I think it's a good place right now to do a meditation. We've spoken many different ways about identifying ourselves as this creative being and how we're relating to our creativity. And I think the best meditation I can think of right now would be to think of yourself maybe in a place that you're very familiar with, that you have created things there before, and think of that you've added some things to your workshop, to your studio. So close your eyes and think about a place where you like to create. It depends on what you create with or where you create. Just a place that's familiar to you. But this time, let it change some. Add something to it that makes you kind of sparkle and feel, oh, this is different now. And it's the same time you are bringing things from within yourself that you're familiar with. You feel the energy rising, feel your heart opening to something new that's coming through you. But it's also in response to what's around you. And you can change anything around you that you choose to, or put yourself in another location, or put the walls down and allow the sun to come in, allow nature to come in, or you can just be very creative with your space right now. Make it a place where you feel at the same time you are yourself and you're able to let much newness come in. You might have a feeling like you're riding on a wave with this newness and energy and what you can bring to this energy. It's a wonderful feeling to feel that something that you have been wanting and that you are really here for is finally being expressed. That it's needed in the world, it's wanted and appreciated. It's making a new place, a new way that wasn't there before. As you're thinking these things, your heart is feeling it's open more and more. Now, staying in this experience, think of one thing that you want to incorporate that you haven't had before in your imaginal or creative process. Something you'll remember when you finish. Now just center in your heart to finish the meditation. Let's open our eyes and be with each other. Okay, would you like to continue?
So let's do a little more exploring with our imaginal faculty. And we could think of the imaginal faculty kind of in a broadband sense, like this just broad function that enables us to shift into a different way of experiencing things. So it could be a desire to be able to experience a subtle realm of being, or a desire to open to just a general creative inspiration about something, or a desire for an insight about some situation that we're having a hard time with. So that'd be kind of like the broad focus of using the imaginal faculty. But I had the idea recently of, well, how can we work with fine-tuning our imaginal faculty? And I was thinking about, I've talked so many times about William Tiller's research on subtle energy, and when subtle energy comes into ordinary reality, it changes the properties of physics. But that's just always been described as like one thing, like a subtle energy does this. But I got to thinking, well, there has to have to be many different flavors of subtle energy, many different aspects and kinds of subtle energy, analogous to different frequencies of light, or analogous to the light that goes through the prism and all the different colors of light that come from it. So imagine that taking place with subtle energy. And imagine that one way that we can do fine tuning is to use our imaginal faculty to fine tune to a particular quality, one of the divine qualities, and use that quality as the kind of the conduit that enables us to open up to new understandings and ways of experiencing. So instead of just kind of this generic subtle energy coming down to physical manifestation and how that's changed and what returns, let's work a bit with just imagining a specific kind of subtle energy in the form of a particular quality. So once again, close your eyes. So we're going to fine tune our imaginal faculty and use the quality of beauty, divine beauty, as a way of perceiving, a way of receiving, a way of experiencing, a way of transforming. And a way of blossoming forth of something that takes place by virtue of our relationship through beauty with whatever it is that we're experiencing. So we've talked before about everything being Gabriel. Everything is seeking to announce itself. And we are also Gabriel, seeking to announce that which is unique, the unique expression of divinity that comes through us. So imagine now that the way that Gabriel is announcing him, herself, or itself through something in nature is through the divine beauty. And it's also the way in which we are Gabriel announcing ourselves through the quality of divine beauty. And so now we're engaged in this state of harmonic relationship that is taking place through the medium of beauty. So you can use some thoughts to launch this, but then just let yourself, like a hawk is carried on a thermal and just soars upwards without any effort. See if you can catch the thermal and ride the current of divine beauty and feel what happens with that. It's your way of plugging into your connection with everything through beauty. And you might have images passing through your mind of beautiful scenes in nature, of beautiful music, of beautiful art, poetry, dance, the bright eyes and smile of a child. The beauty of the earth seen from outer space, beauty of the cosmos. The beauty that your soul is an expression of unlike anything in all of existence. The beauty that is the fruit of that divine thought, prayer that created your soul. And the gift of the transformed beauty that you return back to the divine. The divine being able to see something that could never have been seen or known before, except through you. And feel every cell in your body is suffused with beauty, emanating beauty, the light of divine beauty. Beauty circulates through your veins. Beauty is drawn in and out with each breath. And I'll put a different slant on a phrase from Murshid Hasranite Khan. Thy beauty causes my soul to dance. And my beauty, beauty from each of your souls, of our souls, causes the divine being to dance in ecstasy. And the outer form of that dance is the movement of the stars and planets, light traveling through space at 186,000 miles per second. Vibrations of the atoms and subatomic particles. The songs of birds. The sound of the crickets. The wind. Waters. The sunrise. May all beings, all forms of life, even what we consider inanimate, awaken to the divine beauty that they are. And this universe is. And may this beauty bring hope and healing and comfort and joy to all beings. Amen.
I wanted to add one thing. So this was a wonderful experience in meditation using beauty. So now how can this be changed? You want to give a few examples of some other qualities?
Oh, yeah, glad you raised that. We talked, I think, last time about the idea of there being hot spots everywhere. I mean, that are places of connection and opening ourselves up to something. I say everything is a portal to the sacred. So it could be through compassion, could be a good barometer for how to do this is when you catch yourself reacting and you're experiencing the opposite of what you really need. And then you allow that quality to come through. And compassion would be one example when you're dealing with some very difficult person. So that, I mean, there's so many different qualities. It could be mastery. Ravani Ra talked about the difference between us and the animals. The animals act on their instincts, but just because we get a impulse for something, we don't have to follow it. We can wait, and we develop a power when we do that. And so, like mastery that's needed in a situation, particularly the ones where we're putting off something, I don't really feel like, but we just shake ourselves and get up and get to it and allow the experience of doing that become something that transforms us instead of just something that we're trying to get out of the way. So, as we've said so many times, all of what we've been talking about and all these many hours of classes is about coming to a different way of relating to ourselves and to everything that we experience, whether it's acts in the world or whether it's spiritual practices or whether it's what happens in the inner realms of things, a way of relationship that brings about transformation as opposed to separation.
And so following what you did using beauty, we could rehearse compassion by doing a meditation on compassion, perhaps. You see what I'm saying? Like to work those muscles of compassion, those inner muscles, this one quality in different kinds of ways. And one could be to develop a meditation about that, or even a piece of art about that, in different ways to focus on this one quality.
Yes, and you could also pick a quality and have that be your focus for a whole month. Not that you're going to be thinking about it for 24 hours a day, But whatever you pick, you'll see there'll be many opportunities to manifest that quality, whether it's through your actions in your daily life or through something that you're creating or in your meditation and so on. So you can be creative and use that imaginal faculty to use a particular quality as a way of fine-tuning that imaginal faculty, but also opening up something in you. I mean, it's like maybe the pipe is kind of clogged up at first, but then you really, as Ravani Rao said, you're working with it, and then it becomes more and more natural for you to bring that forth.
Nice. A reminder about next week. We'll not be meeting this coming Thursday,
The 18th.
the 18th. We'll meet that following Thursday, and that date is the
25th.
25th.